Hello, my name is Marlies Henderson. I live in North Billerica, and I like to walk around, I like to bike around, I like the fresh air. And I'm here to tell you about the Bay Circuit, to bring more awareness to the people in Billerica about the Bay Circuit. Behind me you can see a Bay Circuit emblem, and you might have seen that before in Bedford, or maybe in Duxbury, maybe in Newbury, because the Bay Circuit Trail is a very long trail. It's 200 miles and they're all running through Massachusetts. I'm going to show you a few slides to tell you a little bit more about it, and for that I have to pull a lever. Yeah. The Bay Circuit is also called an emerald necklace, an outer emerald necklace, because we all know an emerald necklace, not everyone can afford one, and we might know the inner emerald necklace that is in Boston with the arboretum, and that was actually designed in the previous century by Olmsted, who also designed the Central Park in New York City. Frederick Law Olmsted was the typical enfant terrible. He didn't know what he wanted to do, and he tried many trades, and when he was about 40 years old, he became a landscape architect. And he also decided that his sons were not going to get all the chances at different trades. They were definitely going to immediately become landscape architects. Here's the old man. I'm saying that with respect. The wise man who said that it is a scientific fact that the occasional contemplation of natural scenes is favorable to the health and vigor of man. And he thought this very important. His sons, who continued the business, also thought it very important, and they worked together with Charles Eliot, the landscape architect, not the Charles Eliot, the president of Harvard, but his son, Charles Eliot, who also initiated the trustees of reservations, because more and more people started to have this vision that with the cars becoming the vehicle of choice, there'd be an urban sprawl and the green space would vanish. On this little family tree you can also see that Warren Manning was a contemporary of Charles Eliot. Unfortunately, Charles Eliot died young, and when his brother had a little baby 2-3 years after Charles Eliot died, the grandfather knocked on the door and said, "Is this a girl or is this a boy?" And they said, "It is a boy." And the grandfather decided that this was going to be Charles W. Eliot II. And this Charles W. Eliot II almost turned 100 years old, and all his life he fought to get the Bay Circuit established. When in 1925 the Governor's Committee for Needs and Uses of Open Spaces was formed, he and others in the trustees of reservations ordered a land survey to identify key areas for space acquisition. And as a result, the Bay Circuit appeared on a map in 1929. Now, to just give you some perspective, 1925, this was the kind of car we were driving around. In 1929, this was the kind of car we were driving around. It was all for a few, but as you know, the T Ford was to be for a car for everybody. And then came the Model A Ford. In 1937, the trustees of reservations produced a map, another map with the Bay Circuit in it. And the cars started to change. This is also the kind of car that perhaps Hitler was driving around in, because World War II was kind of on its way. Now let's skip World War II. And in 1945, a Volkswagen entered the scene. In 1960, no, this was 56, I think, The cars were getting more and more futuristic. Cars was all the Americans wanted, and nobody was thinking about any open space or walking or biking anymore. Everything was catered to the car. The cars became so large and long that I couldn't even find a slide to fit the dimensions of my PowerPoint. Now to go back to this map, 1945 was also a year when they had to start thinking about widening the arc, because as urban sprawl was advancing, the arc they had initially in mind was already built full. So they talked about widening the arc at a presentation at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. In 1956, legislation was passed to I don't know all the jargon, how that goes with the state, but legislation, a bill was presented and legislation was passed that Bay Circuit was a collection of towns, 50 different towns, that would all work on having open space plans, but there was no money given. So there was legislation, but there was no funding to help it come about. And it was very unfortunate, because when this idea started in 1925, they thought, well, we're going to just purchase land. And when in 1929, Black Tuesday, the stock market crashed, they thought, well, you know what, the land is cheap, we can wait. But in the meantime, as those cars got nice and fancy and the people drove out to settle down with a nice backyard and a street, that was where all the land became more and more expensive, and it wasn't so easy to preserve land as the trustees of reservations had it in mind initially. Finally, in 1984, funding was arranged. There was actually $3 million, and with those $3 million, they purchased some land, not just for the Bay Circuit. There was also land purchased for the Appalachian Trail in the Berkshires. But a great deal of the money was split in little bits, so the towns could get a grant if they made an open space plan in which they mentioned the Bay Circuit. And because a lot of towns did that and did that well, we can now walk, and we have a Bay Circuit trail. It's not just a Bay Circuit greenway, there is actually a trail. Because in 1990, they found out, after they did a trek through this greenway, that it was a concept that inspired the people. If they could walk from Newburyport to Duxbury on a continuous path, that inspires people. That inspires me. And 200 miles. It's obviously possible because there's only a few gaps. And it is our challenge that the gap is in Billerica. So here's that map again, where you now see the red line is an established trail. The green and white dotted line, that's around Billerica and between Chelmsford and Lowell. Lowell is well on its way to close the gap, and so is Tewkesbury. And we still have a lot of exploring that we can do, and I do it. I found the Middlesex Canal, and I'm not like the only one who found it. I'm just an ignorant person who stumbles upon it, something that exists for a long time. And I took the kids there one day, and I said, look, orchids, rare orchids, a lady slipper. And my husband picked us up, and it had gotten dark, and I told him about the pink lady slippers. And he was going to take a picture of it. It was already dark, but he wanted to take the picture of the rare orchid. On another day, this must have been in the winter because there's fewer leaves and no lady slippers here, but I walked it with my husband with a GPS. It's a nice path, you know. This is by Cara Lane. It's not all as beautiful all over the place, but it's really, it can easily be improved. A little bridge here and there. You can look over to the landfill where they're planning to make solar panels. Who knows if they can put solar panels. There can also be a path to connect us with Tewkesbury. We'd need a little bridge, but when it freezes enough, you can cross Content Brook over the ice, which we did by Richardson Pond. This was in January. It was extremely cold. And this is on Fox Hill, which is Conservation Commission land. And thank goodness for ATVs. They maintain a trail here. Sometimes they'll ruin a trail, but in this case, I'm very happy with ATVs. And when you're on top of Fox Hill, you can almost look all the way to Boston. This was just a shot taken with a little cell phone. So the pixels are not really close. And when we walked between the Whiffle Tree and O'Connor's, there was a beautiful field. This was also a very cold day. But we were outside a lot this past winter. People were saying, oh, I'm so glad the winter's over. And it's like, so what, winter? Just dress up and go outside. What makes you think you can't go outside when it's wintertime?
Part of the proposed Bay Circuit Trail runs through Iron Horse Park, property of Pan Am Railways and formerly known as Boston and Maine Railroad. Due to its Superfund status, we'd most likely have to come up with an alternative route, either along Pond Street or over Fox Hill.
And here's a shot of the old Globe plant where the waste management would settle down, and I talked to them about possibly having a path go by their property. There are a lot of possibilities in Billerica. This is in the same area. This railroad has not been used in a long time. Trees grow in the middle of it. And if you follow this one, you get to Portland Group.
There are many inactive railroads which seem great trail opportunities, but it would involve lengthy negotiations with real estate companies located as far as Houston, Texas. No matter how much a zone has been used for industrial purposes, obviously nature is hardy, as these spring flowers, coltsfoot, prove.
This is along Pond Street, because since we can't go through the Superfund site, I'm looking for alternatives, and ATVs have done the same thing. There are trails, but you can definitely come across signs that warn for asbestos. So perhaps we should stick closer to Pond Street and Salem Road. Here's a picture of Concord Road, where there's a sign for people that walk and can cross the street. When you cross the street at that point, you get to an interesting pole that says trolley. And if you look on the inscription on top of the pole, it talks about a trolley underpass.
100 feet in from the pole, there are the remains of a Lexington and Boston street railway, which was like a subway under the old Boston and Maine railbed, dating back to the year 1900. Over 100 years ago, there was a subway. By now, rails and ties have been removed, and part of this railbed is practically waiting to become our Yankee Doodle bike path.
There is another beautiful area where there's a little stream, and there are the abutments from an old railroad, a narrow gauge. They're still there. All it needs is a little clipping and a small bridge. Of course, also a small talk with National Grid, which I have been in touch with them, and I can see there are possibilities.
Now Now, across from that National Grid transformer station on Middlesex Turnpike, there is a mystery sign. The Fields Conservation Land. I wonder who put up this sign. The Boy Scouts? It's actually private property, but further in is town conservation land, or should I say wetlands, more or less managed by beavers. Except for the old narrow gauge railroad bed, high and dry it runs toward Route 3 in a straight line.
If we were to pretend that we crossed Route 3 on an imagined bridge or by Orchard Overpass, we can eventually come to Technology Park. This way it's a little easier to read. In Technology Park, you can pick up on this narrow gauge trail again, but it does end. This is looking from Bedford to Billerica. This is really where it ends. If you walk on further, you'll just hit parking lots. But the other way around, if you turn around, you go to Bedford, and especially after the Billerica-Bedford line, that's where it gets wider and good for bicycling and walking. I have many more pictures, but this is just a selection of pictures that I've taken this past winter, and together with Yankee Doodle bypass people, together with Bay Circuit people, with Appalachian Mountain Club, with conservation land people, with the town people, I think we can bring about this access to open space that Olmsted had in mind, that was good for the health and vigor of men and women and children, everything. I hope to see you out there.